My
My
decision
son
is
looked
final,
me straight
regardless of how
in
you
the
feel
eye
about it. It's
and
time you
said,
accepted that.
I will
"Mom,
not accept it, not
you
when it
owe me
concerns my
everything.
family. We
Without
told
me,
you this was going
you'd
to
have
happen, but you
nothing."
never listen.
The
You
room
always
fell
think you know
silent.
best, don't you?
My daughter-in-law stood beside him, arms folded, while several relatives stared down at their plates. The house my husband and I had spent 40 years paying for suddenly felt unfamiliar. I could still hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Then Ethan said something that hurt even more. "You lived your whole life through me. Everything you have should belong to me now." My hands trembled, but I didn't cry. Instead, I walked to the old oak cabinet, removed a yellowed envelope that had remained unopened for nearly 12 years, and placed it on the dining room table. My late husband had told me only one thing about it. Give this to Ethan the day he forgets who carried him. And that night, my son finally did. If you've ever loved someone so deeply that you forgot to protect yourself, please stay with me until the end of this story. And if my story touches your heart, consider liking and subscribing. I'd also love to know how you feel about what Ethan said. Please tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are tonight. Sometimes knowing we're not alone makes the hardest stories a little easier to carry. People often assume loneliness arrives all at once. It doesn't. For me, it came quietly. It settled into the empty chair at the kitchen table after my husband died. It slept in the silence of our bedroom. It waited beside the front window every evening while I watched the streetlights come on in our small Ohio neighborhood. My name is Juliana Freeman, and I was 68 years old when my son told me I owed him everything. But long before that terrible evening, there had been another life. A happier one. Richard and I had been married for 43 years. He was an accountant at a manufacturing company outside Columbus, and I worked as a librarian at the local public library. We never had much money, but we had routines that felt rich enough to us. Friday night dinners, Sunday church, coffee on the back porch every morning. And then there was Ethan, our only child. When Ethan was born, Richard cried harder than I did. "I finally have a reason to work harder," he told me while holding our tiny son. We believed our boy could become anything: a doctor, a teacher, a lawyer. Even when money was tight, we protected his dreams. When Ethan was 10, Richard began working overtime. When Ethan was 16, I took evening shifts at a bookstore after leaving the library. I spent my mornings shelving books and my nights standing behind a cash register. Some evenings, I wouldn't return home until nearly midnight. Richard would already be asleep in his chair, and Ethan would be studying at the kitchen table. I still remember placing sandwiches beside him while he prepared for college entrance exams. "You don't have to stay awake for me, Mom," he used to say, but I always stayed, because mothers often believe that love can protect their children from every disappointment. Unfortunately, life eventually teaches us otherwise. Ethan earned excellent grades and was accepted into a prestigious university in Chicago. The tuition terrified us. Richard and I sat at this very kitchen table one winter evening with bills spread around us. "We'll make it work," Richard said. "How?" He looked at me quietly. "We'll borrow if we have to." And we did. Richard refinanced the house. I cashed out part of my retirement savings. Neither of us ever told Ethan how difficult those years became. We didn't want guilt to accompany his success. We wanted him to fly. The day we dropped him off at college, I cried in the parking lot after he disappeared into his dormitory. Richard squeezed my hand. "We did it," he whispered. For years, Ethan called every Sunday. He told us about classes, internships, law school applications. When he graduated from law school, Richard wore the same suit he had worn at our wedding, because he refused to buy a new one. "My son is a lawyer," he told complete strangers. I had never seen him so proud, but success changes some people slowly. At first, the changes seemed small. Ethan became busier, the phone calls shortened, birthdays became text messages, holidays were occasionally postponed. Then he met Melissa. She was beautiful, polished, and ambitious. She worked in marketing and seemed to understand a world that Richard and I had never entered. Luxury restaurants, country clubs, investment properties, corporate events. At first, I truly liked her. She brought flowers during her first visit. She hugged me. She called me Mom. But after the wedding, something changed. Their visits became less frequent. Conversations became hurried. Every discussion somehow returned to money property investments or retirement planning. Richard noticed it before I did. One evening, while washing dishes, he said quietly, "Ethan talks about numbers now. He used to talk about people." I told him he was imagining things. I wanted to believe our son was simply busy building a career. Then Richard became sick. It happened quickly. The diagnosis came in October. The funeral took place in January. I still remember standing beside his hospital bed during his final week. Snow was falling outside. His hands had become thin and cold. He looked at me and said, "You'll be all right." I nodded, even though I knew I wouldn't. Then he asked everyone to leave the room except me. He reached inside the drawer beside his bed and removed a large sealed envelope. "Keep this?" "What is it?" "Promise me you won't open it unless you absolutely have to." I frowned. "Richard," he interrupted me. "If Ethan ever forgets who he is, you'll know." At the time, I didn't understand. I tucked the envelope away after the funeral and tried to continue living. The first year after losing Richard nearly destroyed me. The house felt enormous. I still cooked for 2 people. I still bought his favorite coffee. Sometimes I heard footsteps upstairs and forgot that I lived alone. Helen Parker, my neighbor across the street, became my closest friend. She had lost her husband years earlier. Every Tuesday afternoon, she brought coffee and pie. She refused to let me disappear into grief. "You still have your son," she often reminded me, and I believed her. Ethan visited several times during those early years. He helped with paperwork. He fixed small things around the house. He even mowed the lawn. Whenever he hugged me goodbye, I felt Richard's absence slightly less. But little by little, those visits became shorter. Sometimes, months passed. When I called, Ethan often answered while driving. "I'm heading into a meeting, Mom. I'll call you back." "Things are crazy right now." Melissa was usually busy as well. The grandchildren we had hoped for never came. Work always seemed more important. Still, I defended them. I defended them to Helen, to church friends, to myself. "My son is just busy. He works hard. He has responsibilities." The truth was much harder to admit. I missed him. I missed the boy who studied at the kitchen table. I missed the young man who called every Sunday. I missed hearing, "Mom, I need your advice." Because one day, without realizing it, children stop needing their parents. And sometimes, parents continue loving from the exact same place, while their children quietly move somewhere else entirely. 2 years after Richard died, Ethan called unexpectedly. "Melissa and I are coming this weekend." I smiled for the first time in days. "What for?" "We need to talk about some things." His voice sounded serious. I assumed he meant family, maybe grandchildren, maybe good news. Maybe they wanted to visit more often. That entire Friday, I cleaned the house. I washed the guest sheets. I cooked Richard's favorite roast recipe. I even placed fresh flowers on the dining room table. As evening approached, I stood beside the living room window watching for their car. I had no idea that weekend would begin changing everything. And I certainly didn't know that the old envelope hidden in my bedroom closet was slowly becoming part of my future. Ethan and Melissa arrived just before sunset. I was standing on the front porch when their black SUV pulled into the driveway. For a brief moment, my heart felt 20 years younger. I smoothed my sweater, fixed my hair, and smiled as Ethan stepped out of the driver's seat. He looked successful. Expensive coat, designer watch, polished shoes, the kind of man strangers respected before he even spoke. Melissa climbed out beside him carrying an elegant handbag and wearing a smile that somehow never reached her eyes. "Mom," Ethan said, hugging me quickly. I held him a little longer than he held me. "It's good to see you." "You too." Melissa kissed my cheek. "You look wonderful, Juliana." "Thank you, dear." Inside the house, the smell of roast beef filled the kitchen. The dining table was set with my good dishes, the ones Richard and I had saved for holidays. Candles burned softly near the window. For a few minutes, everything felt normal. We talked about the weather, traffic, their flight to New York the previous month, a charity dinner Melissa had attended. I listened carefully, trying to find pieces of my son inside the confident attorney sitting across from me. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of him. The way he smiled, the way he rubbed his forehead when he was tired, but something felt distant, as though he were visiting a museum rather than coming home. During dinner, Melissa looked around the dining room. "This house is still beautiful." I smiled. "Richard loved this room." Ethan nodded. "Dad always took care of the place." Silence settled briefly. Mentioning Richard still hurt even after all those years. After dessert, Ethan carried his coffee into the living room. Melissa followed him. I noticed them exchange a glance, the kind couples share when they have already discussed something privately. My stomach tightened. Ethan sat in Richard's old chair. For some reason that bothered me. Perhaps because Richard had loved that chair, or perhaps because Ethan looked too comfortable sitting there. "Mom," he began carefully. "Melissa and I wanted to talk to you about something important." I folded my hands. "Of course." Melissa leaned forward. "We've been worried about you." I blinked. "Worried?" "You're alone here," Ethan said. "This house is large. The winters are difficult. You're getting older." Getting older? People say those words as though age is a disease. I forced a smile. "I'm managing." "I know you are," he said, "but that doesn't mean you should." Melissa nodded. There are wonderful communities for seniors now. Beautiful places, activities, friends, healthcare nearby. I stared at her. A retirement community. She smiled politely. "Just something to consider." I looked at Ethan. He avoided my eyes. The room suddenly felt colder. "This is my home. We know that." "I lived here with your father for 40 years, Ethan sighed. "And that's exactly why we're bringing this up now." I could hear the grandfather clock ticking. Tick, tick, tick. "We think it may be time to sell." The words landed like stones. Sell. The house, Richard's workshop, the porch where we drank coffee, the hallway where Ethan learned to walk, the kitchen where I packed thousands of school lunches. I felt my chest tighten. "I don't want to sell." "Mom, listen." "No." Melissa spoke softly. "It isn't about taking something from you." "Then what is it about?" Ethan rubbed his temples. "Practicality." I laughed quietly. Practicality. People often use practical words when discussing emotional things. "The house is worth a lot now," he continued. "The market is excellent." I looked directly at him. "How much?" He hesitated. Around 600,000. The number shocked me. Richard and I had bought the house for less than $60,000 decades earlier. Melissa smiled slightly. That money could really improve your quality of life. My quality of life. I glanced around the room. Richard's photographs, our piano, the bookshelves, the wedding picture above the fireplace. What exactly was wrong with my life? I don't need $600,000. Ethan leaned forward. But eventually, you'll need care. I have savings. This isn't only about money. It certainly sounded like it was. I stood and collected the empty coffee cups. Nobody followed me into the kitchen. As I washed dishes, I could hear their voices in the living room. Soft, quiet, planned. Helen's words suddenly returned to me. People sometimes decide what's best for us without asking what we want. When I returned, Melissa was scrolling through her phone. She turned the screen toward me. Look at this place. It was a retirement community. Beautiful gardens, luxury apartments, swimming pools, happy elderly couples. Everything looked expensive and artificial. It looks lovely, I said. It really is, she replied. Ethan added, there are waiting lists. We'd need to act soon. We, not you. We, as though my future had already become a committee decision. That evening, after they went upstairs to the guest room, I sat alone in the kitchen. The house felt different, smaller, as if invisible people had entered with them. I looked toward the hallway closet. Inside the bedroom upstairs sat the old envelope Richard had given me. For the first time in years, I thought about it. Not because I needed it, not yet, but because something Richard once said returned to me. People reveal themselves when they begin counting things. Money, property, inheritance, value. Richard had always believed that gratitude was a person's true wealth. I wondered what he would think if he could see Ethan now. The next morning, Melissa asked about my medications. The morning after that, she asked about my bank accounts. By Sunday afternoon, Ethan wanted to review my insurance policies. Each question sounded reasonable, responsible, caring. But together, they formed something else. Something I couldn't yet understand. Before leaving, Ethan hugged me. We just want what's best for you. I nodded. I know. But the truth was, I wasn't entirely sure anymore. As their SUV disappeared down the street, Helen crossed over from her yard carrying a pie. They leave already. Yes. She studied my face. What happened? I hesitated. Then I said quietly, they think I should sell the house. Helen frowned. Do you want to? No. Then don't. It's not that simple. She placed the pie on my counter. Actually, Juliana, sometimes it is. That night, I walked through every room. Richard's workshop, Ethan's old bedroom, the attic, the back porch. Every space carried memories. I finally entered my bedroom and opened the closet. On the top shelf sat the envelope. Yellow, sealed, untouched. I picked it up. My husband's handwriting still covered the front. For Juliana, only if necessary. I ran my fingers over the paper. Then I placed it back exactly where it had been. Because I still believed my son loved me. I still believed there had to be another explanation. What I didn't know was that somewhere far away, Ethan and Melissa were already discussing my house again, and their reasons had very little to do with my happiness. The next time Ethan and Melissa visited, I prepared dinner again. Perhaps that sounds foolish. After all, they had already suggested selling my house. They had already spoken about retirement communities and market values and future plans that I had never asked for. But mothers often continue setting the table long after their children stop coming home for the meal. It was late October. The leaves outside had turned gold and red. The air carried that familiar Ohio chill that always reminded me of football games, pumpkin pies, and Richard wearing his old brown jacket. I made chicken pot pie because Ethan had loved it as a boy. When he was 12, he once told his teacher it was his favorite meal in the entire world. I wondered if he even remembered. Melissa arrived carrying a bottle of wine. Ethan came in while answering an email on his phone. He kissed my cheek without looking up. "Sorry, Mom. Busy day?" "It's all right." But something inside me quietly whispered that it wasn't. During dinner, I tried to steer the conversation toward family memories. "Do you remember the camping trip near Lake Erie?" I asked. Ethan looked up. "Vaguely. You got lost trying to catch frogs." Melissa laughed politely. I can't picture Ethan catching frogs. "He used to bring every injured animal home," I said. Ethan smiled slightly. "I was a kid." "Your father said you had a bigger heart than anyone he'd ever met." The smile disappeared. Melissa changed the subject. "The housing market has gone up again." I looked at her. "Oh?" She nodded. "Some homes around here sold for incredible prices." Ethan took a sip of wine. "Your neighborhood is becoming valuable." There it was again. The house. Always the house. I cut another piece of chicken and kept my eyes on my plate. "I like my neighborhood." "Of course," Ethan said. "But you have to think practically." I looked up. "Practical seems to be your favorite word lately." He sighed. "I'm only trying to help." Melissa leaned forward. "Juliana, please don't misunderstand us." "What should I understand?" She hesitated. "We just think you're sitting on a very valuable asset." Asset. Not home, not memories, not family. Asset. Something inside me tightened. Ethan folded his napkin. "You could sell this place and move somewhere easier. You'd have money to travel." "I'm 68. So, I don't want to travel." "You could move closer to us?" The idea sounded wonderful for exactly 2 seconds. Then reality returned. How often had they visited during the past year? 4 times 5. Would they suddenly become available because I lived 20 minutes closer? I doubted it. Dinner continued quietly. After dessert, Ethan stood near the fireplace looking at the family photographs. There was one picture taken on his law school graduation day. Richard stood beside him, beaming with pride. I remembered that day clearly. Richard had spent almost an entire paycheck on Ethan's graduation dinner. He never regretted it. Ethan stared at the photograph. "I worked hard for all of this." The comment seemed strange. "Of course you did," I said. "I sacrificed a lot." I nodded. "Yes." He turned toward me. "People think success just happens." Melissa immediately agreed. "Ethan has worked harder than anyone I know." I smiled gently. "I'm proud of him." But Ethan wasn't finished. "Sometimes I think people don't understand what it cost me." The room became quiet. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "The pressure, the expectations, the responsibility." I looked at him carefully. Every parent hopes their child succeeds. Yes, but then parents start depending on that success. I felt my stomach drop. "What are you saying?" Melissa reached for her wine. Ethan sat down again. "I'm saying that sometimes parents live through their children." The words settled heavily between us. I tried to laugh. "Your father and I had our own lives." "Did you His tone surprised me. For a moment I saw not my son, but a stranger. You always pushed me. We encouraged you. You wanted me to succeed, because we loved you. He rubbed his forehead. I know, but his voice suggested something else, something bitter, something that had apparently been growing for years. After dinner, Melissa helped me wash dishes. At least that was what she called it. Mostly she stood beside me talking. You know, Ethan carries a lot. He always has. He feels responsible for you. I turned off the faucet. Responsible? You're alone. I'm capable. Of course. The words sounded rehearsed. Then she said something that stayed with me. Children eventually become their parents' security. I looked at her. My husband and I never raised Ethan to become our security. She smiled politely. I only mean emotionally. But I wasn't certain she did. Later that evening, Ethan and I sat alone in the living room. The television was off. The fire glowed softly. For a moment, it almost felt like old times. He looked tired, older. The lines around his eyes had deepened. Are you happy? I asked. He seemed surprised. What? Are you happy? He didn't answer immediately. I have a good career. That's not what I asked. He stared into the fireplace. Success is expensive. Your father used to say peace was more important. Dad never had my responsibilities. The sentence hurt because Richard had spent his entire life carrying responsibilities. Mortgage payments, college tuition, hospital bills, overtime shifts, but Ethan had somehow forgotten. Your father sacrificed everything for this family. Ethan looked away. I know. Do you... The room grew quiet. Then he stood. I think people forget what I've accomplished. I felt a strange sadness, because he genuinely needed to say it, as though he required constant proof of his own value. I don't forget, I said, but success isn't something you owe people. He looked at me. And sacrifice isn't something children owe forever either. The sentence landed between us. Children don't owe forever. Perhaps that was true, but neither do parents. After he went upstairs, I sat alone for nearly an hour. The grandfather clock ticked. Wind touched the windows. Richard's photograph stood beside me. I suddenly remembered something George Whitman once said at church. Success can make people believe they built their own ladder. Sometimes they forget who held it steady. The following morning before breakfast, I overheard Ethan speaking to Melissa in the kitchen. He thought I was upstairs. We need to convince her. Melissa lowered her voice. Don't push too hard. She isn't listening. Give it time. We don't have much. Silence. Then Melissa asked quietly. What if she refuses? Ethan answered. We'll figure something out. I returned upstairs before they noticed me. My hands trembled. I didn't know what they meant. I didn't know what they needed. But for the first time in my life, I felt uneasy inside my own home. That afternoon, while making tea, Helen stopped by. She looked at my face and immediately frowned. What happened now? I hesitated. Then I told her. Not everything, just enough. She listened carefully. Finally, she asked one question. Juliana, when was the last time Ethan asked how you were doing? I searched my memory, and to my surprise, I couldn't remember, because lately every conversation had become about my future, my health, my finances, my house. Everything except me. That night, after everyone went to bed, I opened Richard's closet. The envelope remained exactly where I had left it. I touched it again. Still sealed, still waiting. And for the first time, I wondered whether my husband had seen something in our son long before I ever could. For several days after Ethan and Melissa left, the house felt unusually quiet. Not peaceful, not comforting, just quiet. The kind of silence that makes you replay conversations you wish had gone differently. I found myself standing at the kitchen sink, hearing Ethan's words again. You're sitting on a valuable asset. Parents live through their children. Success is expensive. The sentences seemed harmless individually, but together they formed something colder. Something that did not sound like my son. Helen noticed it immediately. She arrived Tuesday afternoon carrying blueberry muffins and found me staring through the living room window. You've been doing that for 20 minutes. I smiled weakly. I didn't realize. She sat beside me. Tell me everything. So I did. The conversations, the retirement communities, the house, the strange tension, the feeling that every discussion somehow ended with money. Helen listened quietly. When I finished, she asked one question. Have they ever asked what you want? I opened my mouth, then closed it. Because the answer was no. Not once. Not truly. 3 weeks passed. November arrived. The trees outside became bare and cold winds began sweeping through the neighborhood. I decorated the porch for Thanksgiving, even though Ethan had already told me they would be spending the holiday with Melissa's family in Chicago. It's complicated this year, Mom. Everything seemed complicated now. One Thursday evening, the telephone rang after 9. Ethan, his voice sounded strained. Hi, Mom. Is everything all right? Yes, just busy. There was a long silence. Too long. Finally, he asked, Are you still thinking about selling the house? My heart sank. Not hello. Not how are you. Not I miss you. The house. Again. No, he sighed. Mom, you're being stubborn. I don't believe I am. You aren't looking at reality. What reality? The future. I walked toward the window. Outside, snow had begun falling. My future belongs to me. Your future affects me too. The sentence surprised me. How? Silence. Then he answered, Because I'm your son. I waited. He said nothing else. After we hung up, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I went downstairs and made tea. The house creaked softly. Richard used to say old houses breathe during winter. I sat alone at the kitchen table, and for the first time a frightening thought entered my mind. What if Ethan needed something not wanted, needed? The next morning, I drove to the grocery store. As I loaded bags into my trunk, I heard someone call my name. Mrs. Freeman? I turned. A young woman in her 30s approached me. It took several seconds before I recognized her. Emma? Emma Collins smiled. She was Ethan's cousin on Richard's side of the family. As children, they had spent summers together. She hugged me warmly. It's been years. It has. We decided to have coffee nearby. Emma worked as a financial advisor in Columbus. She spoke quickly, laughed easily, and reminded me of Richard's family. Eventually, she asked about Ethan. How's he doing? I hesitated. Busy. She stirred her coffee. He's still with that law firm. Yes. Her expression changed slightly. What? She looked uncertain. I probably shouldn't say anything. Emma, she sighed. I heard some things. My heart began to beat faster. What things? There were rumors. About Ethan. She nodded. One of my clients works downtown. I remained silent. He said several attorneys left Ethan's investment group. What investment group? Emma looked surprised. You don't know? I felt cold. No. She leaned back. I assumed Ethan told you. He didn't. Apparently, several professionals in Columbus had invested money in a commercial real estate project. Ethan had participated heavily. The market shifted. Investors lost money. There had been disagreements, legal issues, nothing criminal, but substantial losses. How substantial? Emma hesitated. I honestly don't know. Is Ethan involved? He invested personally. I stared at my untouched coffee. Suddenly, every conversation about my house returned. The market is excellent. You're sitting on a valuable asset. You should think about your future. My future. Or his. That evening I called Ethan. He answered after several attempts. Mom, how are your investments? Silence. What? Emma mentioned some problems. His voice hardened. You talked to Emma. She saw me today. It's none of her business. So there are problems. It's complicated. There it is again. What? Everything is complicated. He exhaled heavily. It's temporary. How temporary? I'm handling it. How much money? Mom, how much? Silence. Long silence. Then, more than I expected. My knees weakened. I sat down. Ethan, I said I'm handling it. Is that why you want me to sell my house? His voice became sharp. This isn't about your house. Then why do you keep talking about it? Another silence. Then he ended the call. I sat alone in my kitchen. The clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, snow continued falling, and for the first time in my life, I realized my son had lied to me. Not directly, but through omission, through half-truths, through carefully chosen conversations. The following Sunday, Helen came for lunch. I told her everything. She listened quietly. Finally, she asked, Do you know how much debt he's in? No. Does he know about your savings? Some. Your accounts, I suppose. She folded her hands. Juliana, you need to be careful. He would never hurt me. She looked directly into my eyes. I don't think Ethan wants to hurt you. Then what? I think he may believe he's entitled. The word disturbed me. Entitled. I thought about Ethan as a little boy. About scraped knees, school plays, Christmas mornings, college graduation. How does a child become entitled to his mother's life? That evening, while organizing old documents, I found several photographs. Richard teaching Ethan to ride a bicycle. Richard helping him study. Richard working under the hood of Ethan's first car. There were hundreds of memories. Thousands. Suddenly, I remembered something that happened nearly 20 years earlier. Ethan had been in trouble during college. Serious trouble. Richard handled it quietly, privately. I never knew every detail, only that it involved money. Richard had told me, our son deserves a second chance. I had never asked questions. Perhaps I should have. Perhaps Richard had seen warning signs long before I did. Later that night, my phone rang again. It was Melissa. She almost never called me directly. Juliana. Melissa. I wanted to check on you. Her voice sounded nervous. I'm fine. Ethan's been stressed. I know. He's under a lot of pressure. Is he losing money? Silence. Then things are difficult. How difficult? I shouldn't discuss it. But you are. She inhaled slowly. We just need some time. We. Not Ethan. We. I realized then that they were frightened. Genuinely frightened. Not about me. About themselves. Before hanging up, Melissa said something that stayed with me. Ethan feels like he carries everyone. After the call ended, I sat quietly for several minutes. Carries everyone. My son believed he carried his family, but he had forgotten something very important. His father and I had carried him for 40 years, and somewhere in the upstairs closet inside an old yellow envelope, Richard had apparently left behind a truth he knew our son might someday need to hear. The question was no longer whether Ethan wanted my house. The question had become much more frightening. How badly did he need it? December arrived with heavy snow. The neighborhood looked beautiful from my front window. White rooftops, bare trees, smoke rising from chimneys. The kind of winter Richard had always loved. But inside me, something had changed. For the first time in my life, I was afraid of disappointing my son. Not because I had done something wrong, but because I had begun saying no. Ethan called more often during those weeks. At first, I welcomed it. He asked about my health, the furnace, the icy sidewalks, whether I had enough groceries. The conversations almost felt normal. Almost. Because eventually, every call returned to the same subject. The future, the house, my finances. One Wednesday afternoon, he called while I was wrapping Christmas gifts for the church donation drive. Mom, Melissa, and I are coming Saturday. I smiled. That will be nice. We need to go over some things. The words immediately made my stomach tighten. What things? Just planning. Planning what? My schedule is packed after Christmas. It would be good to organize everything. Everything. The word felt larger than it should have. Saturday arrived cold and gray. Helen had come earlier that morning. She helped me bake cookies and hang decorations. Before leaving, she touched my arm. Trust your instincts. I laughed softly. I don't know what my instincts are anymore. They're the part of you that's been speaking quietly. Around noon, Ethan and Melissa arrived. This time, they brought no flowers, no wine, no small talk. Melissa carried a leather folder. Ethan carried his laptop. Something inside me immediately became uneasy. We sat in the dining room, the same table where Richard had balanced bills, the same table where Ethan had done homework, the same table where our family had celebrated birthdays. Ethan opened his computer. I've been looking into options. Options, another one of his new favorite words. Melissa placed several brochures in front of me. Retirement communities, senior apartments, independent living centers. I pushed them gently aside. I've already told you I don't want to move. Ethan remained calm. You may not want to now. Then why are we discussing it? Because emergencies happen. I understand that. Melissa spoke softly. We're trying to protect you. I looked at her. From what? Neither answered. Instead, Ethan opened a spreadsheet. Numbers filled the screen. Property values, estimated expenses, taxes, insurance, maintenance costs. He spoke like a lawyer, like a financial advisor, like someone presenting a business proposal, not a son speaking to his mother. You have substantial equity. I said nothing. You also have retirement savings. I looked up. How do you know that? He hesitated. You mentioned it before. I never told you the amount? He looked uncomfortable. I made assumptions. The room suddenly felt colder. Melissa cleared her throat. We've simply been trying to understand the big picture. The big picture of what? Your future. There it was again. Always my future. Never my wishes. Never my feelings. Ethan finally removed several papers from his briefcase. "Mom, I brought something." My heart sank. "What is it?" "Nothing serious." He smiled. Too quickly. "It's simply precautionary." I stared at the documents, legal forms, several signatures highlighted. My hands became cold. "What are they?" "A financial power of attorney." I looked at him. "A what?" "It would allow me to help if something happened." "Nothing has happened." "I know." "Then why do I need this?" He leaned forward. "Mom, if you became ill." "I am not ill." "If you were hospitalized." "I'm not." Melissa joined in. "It would only protect you." I picked up the papers. The language was complicated, legal, dense. I had spent years working in libraries, and even I struggled to understand it. "George could explain it," I said. Ethan's expression changed. "George, your father's lawyer." "We don't need George." "Why not?" He sighed. "Because this is simple." "Then George can confirm that." For the first time all afternoon, Ethan appeared irritated. "Mom, you don't need another lawyer." "I didn't know I needed one at all." Silence. I continued reading. The words bothered me. Authority, control, financial decisions, property, accounts, investments. My chest tightened. "I don't understand all of this." "I'll explain it." I'd prefer George. His jaw tightened. "Why don't you trust me?" The question struck me, because the answer frightened me. I wasn't sure anymore. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. All three of us looked up. I stood. "I'll get it." When I opened the door, Helen stood there holding a container of soup. "Oh," she said, noticing everyone. "I didn't realize you had company." I nearly hugged her. "Come inside." Ethan looked surprised. Helen smiled politely. "Sorry to interrupt." "You aren't interrupting," I said. She entered and placed the soup on the counter. Then she noticed the documents spread across the dining table. "What's all this?" Ethan answered quickly. "Just planning for Mom's future." Helen looked at me. I looked back at her. She immediately understood. "I see." She sat down. "Mind if I ask a question?" Ethan folded his arms. "Sure." "Has Juliana asked for help?" "No." "Then why now?" Melissa spoke carefully. "We're being proactive." Helen nodded. "Interesting." The room became uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Helen had always possessed a remarkable ability to see directly through people. She looked at the papers. "Power of attorney." "It's standard," Ethan said. "For whom?" "My mother." Helen turned to me. "Do you want to sign it?" I answered honestly. "I don't know." "Then don't." Ethan exhaled loudly. "This isn't helping." "No," Helen replied calmly. "Rushing her isn't helping." He stood up. "I'm not rushing anyone." "Then why bring documents?" His face reddened. "Because I'm trying to protect my mother." Helen's voice remained gentle. Protection without permission can feel like control. Nobody spoke. The grandfather clock ticked. Outside, snow fell softly. Finally, I said, "I want time." Ethan looked frustrated. "Mom, I want time." Melissa gathered the brochures. Ethan slowly closed his laptop. The atmosphere had changed. Something invisible now sat between us. Distrust, fear, disappointment. As they prepared to leave, Ethan spoke quietly. "You think I'm trying to take advantage of you?" I met his eyes. I don't know what to think. His expression hurt me because beneath the anger, I saw genuine pain. But I also saw desperation. And desperation can make good people dangerous. After they left, Helen stayed. We sat in the kitchen drinking tea. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, she said, "Take those papers to George." "I don't want to embarrass Ethan." "Juliana." I looked at her. "You aren't embarrassing your son by protecting yourself." Tears finally filled my eyes. "I don't understand what's happening." She reached across the table. "Neither do I." Later that evening, I placed the documents inside a folder. I set them beside my purse. The next morning, I planned to visit George Whitman, Richard's old friend, the man who had handled our wills, the man who had known my husband for nearly 50 years. As I turned off the lights downstairs, I looked toward the bedroom closet. The envelope remained untouched, still waiting, still silent. And for the first time, I wondered if Richard had left it behind, not because he expected Ethan to change, but because he feared he someday would. The next morning, snow covered the roads. I drove slowly into Columbus with Ethan's documents resting on the passenger seat beside me. The windshield wipers pushed aside heavy flakes while Christmas music played softly on the radio. For nearly 40 years, George Whitman had been more than our lawyer. He had been Richard's fishing partner, our dinner guest, the man who stood beside me at Richard's funeral. If anyone could help me understand what was happening, it was George. His office sat in an old brick building downtown, the same building where Richard and I had signed our first will decades earlier. George looked older now, thinner. His white hair had nearly disappeared, but his eyes remained sharp. "Juliana." He stood and hugged me. "I wish Richard could see you." I smiled sadly. "So do I." We sat in his office, surrounded by bookshelves and framed photographs. One picture showed George and Richard holding enormous fish beside a lake. The sight immediately made my chest ache. "What brings you here?" he asked. I removed the folder from my purse. "I need you to look at something." His expression changed as he examined the documents. He read silently, once, twice, a third time. The room became very quiet. Finally, he removed his glasses. "Did Ethan prepare these?" "Through his firm." George leaned back. "Did he explain them?" "He said they protect me." George folded his hands. "Juliana, some of these documents go beyond protection." My stomach tightened. "What does that mean?" He opened the pages. "This grants broad financial authority." "Broad." "He could manage accounts." He pointed. "Property decisions." Another page. "Insurance." Another. "Investments." My throat became dry. "Would he own my house?" "Not immediately. But," George hesitated, "combined with other decisions, he would have significant control." I stared at the papers. The room suddenly felt smaller. "Would you advise me to sign?" "No." The answer came instantly. Not maybe, not eventually. No. I looked at him. "Are you certain?" "Absolutely." I could feel tears threatening. I don't understand why Ethan would do this. George remained quiet for several moments. Finally, he said, "Sometimes people convince themselves they're helping, and sometimes they convince themselves they deserve something." The word again. Deserve. Entitled. I hated it because it forced me to see my son differently. George continued studying the paperwork. Then he frowned. "There's something else." "What?" He pointed toward a financial statement attached to the documents. "This estimate. What about it? It assumes your house will eventually be sold." I stared. "Sold?" "Yes." He looked at me. "Did you authorize that?" "No." The office became silent. Outside, snow continued falling. I felt embarrassed, ashamed, as though I had somehow failed as a mother. George's voice softened. "Juliana, none of this is your fault." I nodded, unable to speak. Then he said something unexpected. "Richard worried about Ethan." I looked up immediately. "What?" George seemed uncertain. "I probably shouldn't. Please." He removed his glasses again. "Several years before Richard died, Ethan had some financial problems." My heart began pounding. "College?" "No." "Law school?" George shook his head. "Early career." I remembered. The memory returned immediately. Richard taking several phone calls, long evenings in his office, arguments I never fully understood. "What happened?" George sighed. "Ethan made some poor decisions." "What kind?" "He invested money he didn't have." "How much?" "I don't know the exact amount." "But Richard helped." George nodded slowly. "Your husband sold part of his retirement portfolio." I stared at him. "He told me it was medical expenses. He didn't want you to worry." The room blurred. For years, I had believed our financial struggles came from hospital bills and retirement planning, but Richard had secretly helped Ethan. Again. Even after paying college tuition. Even after refinancing the house. Again. George watched me carefully. "Richard loved him." "I know." "He never wanted Ethan to feel ashamed." I closed my eyes. My husband had spent his life protecting our son, even from himself. As I prepared to leave, George spoke again. "Richard left something with me." I turned. "What?" He opened a drawer. Inside sat a sealed envelope, not the one upstairs, another one. My heart stopped. "What is that?" "Your husband gave it to me before he died." I stared. "He said I should only give it to you if you ever came here because of Ethan." The room became completely silent. My hands trembled. "Why?" George looked at the envelope. I asked him the same question. And he said a father sometimes sees storms before everyone else. I carefully accepted the envelope. Richard's handwriting covered the front. "For George, if Juliana ever needs answers." Tears filled my eyes. "Did he know?" George answered honestly. "I think he feared." I drove home in silence. The roads were nearly empty. The envelope rested beside me. I wanted to open it immediately, but I couldn't. Not yet. Because opening it felt like admitting something terrible, that my husband had anticipated this day. When I arrived home, Helen was waiting on my porch. She immediately noticed my face. "What happened?" I handed her the documents. "He said not to sign." She nodded. "What else?" I sat beside her. Then I told her everything. Richard's secret help, George's concerns, the second envelope. Helen became very quiet. Your husband knew something. I don't want to believe it. But you do. I looked toward the house, toward the upstairs closet, toward the original envelope. There were now two warnings, two secrets, two pieces of Richard waiting patiently for me to catch up. That evening, my phone rang. Ethan. I almost didn't answer. Mom? Hello? Did you sign them? My chest tightened. No. Silence. Then, why? I wanted another opinion. His voice changed instantly. You took them to George. It wasn't a question. Yes. Ethan, I told you those documents were standard. George disagrees. He doesn't understand current law. He practiced law for 50 years. Ethan exhaled sharply. Mom, you're making this difficult. Difficult. Another new word. I don't understand why you're angry. I'm not angry. He was. I could hear it. Did George tell you not to trust me? No. What did he say? I hesitated, because suddenly I realized something. For the first time in my life, I didn't want to answer my son, because I was afraid of what he might say next. Finally, I replied. He told me to protect myself. Silence. Long silence. Then Ethan spoke quietly. I've spent my entire life protecting this family. The statement shocked me. Protecting us from what he ended the call shortly afterward. That night, I climbed the stairs slowly. Inside my bedroom closet sat Richard's envelope. On my dresser rested George's envelope. Two sealed answers. Two pieces of my husband's voice. I sat on the edge of my bed. Outside, snow touched the windows. The house felt strangely alive, as though Richard himself stood nearby, watching, waiting. And for the first time, I truly understood something. My husband had not left those envelopes because he stopped believing in our son. He left them because he knew I would continue believing long after I should have stopped. For 3 days, I did not open either envelope. They remained exactly where I had placed them. George's envelope sat on my dresser. Richard's original envelope remained in the closet. I passed them dozens of times. Each time, I looked away. Because opening them meant accepting something I still wasn't ready to believe. That my husband had seen this coming. That he had anticipated a day when our son might forget the sacrifices that built his life. Christmas was only 2 weeks away. The house should have been filled with excitement. Instead, it felt like a place waiting for a storm. Helen called every evening. George checked on me twice. Even Emma sent a message asking whether I was all right. Only Ethan remained distant. He didn't call for nearly a week. Part of me felt relieved. Another part felt heartbroken. On Thursday afternoon, I decided to visit Richard's grave. The cemetery sat outside town beneath several large oak trees. Snow covered most of the ground, and only the tops of the headstones remained visible. I carried fresh flowers, the same white lilies he had always loved. I stood there for a long time. I'm angry with you, I finally whispered. The wind moved softly through the trees. Why didn't you tell me? Of course, there was no answer. Only silence. But standing there, I remembered the final weeks of Richard's life. The memories returned more clearly than they had in years. The hospital room, the machines, the winter light. One evening shortly before Christmas, 12 years earlier, he had asked me to close the door. He looked exhausted, thinner than I had ever seen him, yet his eyes remained clear. Juliana. I'm here. He reached for my hand. Promise me something. Anything. If Ethan ever changes, I immediately interrupted him. He won't. Richard smiled sadly. We all change. Not like that. He looked toward the window. When people become successful, they start hearing different voices. I frowned. What do you mean? Money. Status. Fear. He coughed for several seconds. I helped him drink water. Then he continued. A man can spend so much time climbing that he forgets who helped him stand. At the time, I thought he was simply speaking about life, general wisdom, a dying husband sharing advice. I didn't realize he was speaking specifically about our son. The memory faded as I stood beside his grave. Snow landed on my coat. I still believe in him, I whispered, and perhaps that was the problem. When I returned home, I finally climbed upstairs. I carried both envelopes downstairs and placed them on the dining room table. Richard's handwriting covered both. The sight alone made me cry. The first envelope, the one from George, felt easier. So I opened it. Inside was a single handwritten letter. Richard's writing was slightly uneven. Dear George, if Juliana is reading this, then Ethan has probably reached a place I hoped he never would. Please help her trust herself. She will always choose love before protection. That is why I love her, but it is also why she may need help. Ethan is not a bad man. He is simply vulnerable to believing that success belongs entirely to the person standing at the top. If that day comes, remind him who carried him. Remind Juliana that protecting herself is not betraying her son. I stopped reading. Tears blurred the page. Because the letter wasn't really about Ethan. It was about me. Richard knew me. He knew I would defend our son. Excuse him. Protect him. Even against myself. Helen arrived an hour later. She found me sitting alone with the letter. What happened? I handed it to her. She read quietly. When she finished, she wiped her eyes. He knew you very well. Too well. No, she said softly. Exactly well enough. I looked at the second envelope, the original one, the one Richard had placed in my hands inside the hospital room. I still couldn't open it. Helen understood immediately. You don't have to today. What if I'm already too late? Too late for what? For Ethan. She sat beside me. Juliana, this envelope isn't about giving up on your son. Then what is it? It's about seeing him clearly. That night, I slept very little. Around 2 a.m, I walked downstairs. The Christmas tree glowed quietly in the corner. Richard used to sit beside it every year after everyone went to bed. He claimed it was the only time a Christmas tree truly looked alive. I sat in his chair, and another memory returned. Ethan was 26. He had recently started working at his law firm. One evening, he arrived home unexpectedly. He looked frightened. Richard took him into the garage. They talked for nearly 2 hours. When they returned, Ethan's eyes were red. I asked what happened. Richard simply said, "He's going to be fine." A few weeks later, our retirement account became noticeably smaller. Richard told me he had adjusted some investments. I never questioned him, because I trusted him completely. Now I wondered whether that night had been the beginning. Had Ethan already struggled with money? Had Richard already rescued him? Had my husband already seen the danger of pride? The next afternoon, George called. Have you opened the second envelope? No. His voice remained gentle. Richard wanted you to wait until you were ready. What if I'm never ready? You will be. After the call, I opened an old photo album. There was Ethan at 6 years old, covered in mud, smiling. There he was at 16, holding his first car. At 22, graduating law school. Every photograph showed a young man full of promise. I touched one picture in particular. Ethan standing beside Richard, both laughing, both looking at one another. I suddenly realized something. Richard had never doubted Ethan's goodness. He feared Ethan's forgetting. There is a difference. A bad person causes pain intentionally. A person who forgets can cause pain while believing he deserves what he takes. That evening, my phone rang. Ethan. I stared at the screen. Finally, I answered. "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded tired. "Hello? Are you okay?" The question surprised me. "Yes." Silence. Then he said, "I've been under a lot of pressure." "I know. I don't want you listening to other people." "What people?" "George. Helen. Emma." I spoke carefully. "They care about me." "So do I." I wanted to believe him. I still did. But then he said something that chilled me. "You have to trust me." Not, "How are you?" Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Let's talk." You have to trust me. After we ended the call, I looked at the unopened envelope. Richard's final words suddenly returned to me. "You'll know when the time comes." For the first time, I wondered if that time was very close. Because somewhere between the frightened young man Richard once protected and the successful attorney Ethan had become my son, had started asking for trust without offering honesty. And perhaps that was exactly the day my husband had feared. Christmas arrived with more snow than Ohio had seen in years. The streets were covered. The church bells sounded softer. The neighborhood lights glowed against the white landscape. Yet inside my house, I felt no peace. 3 days before Christmas Eve, Ethan called. "Mom, I'd like everyone to come over Christmas afternoon." I frowned. "Everyone?" "Melissa, Emma, Uncle David, Aunt Susan." "Why, we need to talk." My hands tightened around the telephone. "About what?" "Family." There was something in his voice, something rehearsed, something that made me immediately think of the unopened envelope. "I don't think Christmas is the right time." "It has to be now." "Why?" He hesitated. "Because things can't continue this way." Things, not relationships, not feelings. Things. I agreed because I was tired. Tired of uncertainty. Tired of wondering. Tired of pretending nothing had changed. Christmas morning arrived quietly. I attended church with Helen. The choir sang Richard's favorite hymn. I cried through most of the service. Not because I missed my husband more than usual, but because I suddenly needed him. When we returned home, Helen helped me prepare dinner. Turkey, mashed potatoes, green beans, pumpkin pie. Exactly as Richard had always wanted. Before leaving, Helen squeezed my hand. "You don't have to let anyone pressure you." "I know." "No, Juliana, I mean it." I nodded, but inside I wasn't sure. Because Ethan still had one enormous advantage. He was my son. The guests arrived shortly after 2. Emma came first. She hugged me tightly. "You look beautiful." "I feel nervous." "So do I." Uncle David and Aunt Susan followed. Both were Richard's older relatives, kind people, the type who believed families could survive anything. Finally, Ethan and Melissa arrived. They carried expensive gifts, expensive wine, perfect smiles, but neither looked happy. Throughout dinner, Conversation remained strained. People talked about weather, football, Christmas decorations, travel plans. Nobody mentioned the tension sitting in the room beside us. I noticed Ethan checking his watch repeatedly. Melissa barely touched her food. Emma looked worried, and I could hardly swallow. After dessert, Ethan stood. His voice immediately changed. Professional, controlled, the voice of an attorney. Could everyone stay for a few minutes? The room became quiet. I felt my stomach tighten. He looked directly at me. Mom, I think we need to discuss your future. There it was. Again. Not Christmas. Not family. My future. Uncle David frowned. What future? Ethan folded his hands. My mother's situation. I spoke quietly. My situation. You're alone. Melissa nodded. The house is becoming difficult. I stared at her. The house is fine. Ethan continued. You need support. Emma shifted uncomfortably. Aunt Susan looked confused. I suddenly realized something. They didn't know. He had brought them here, as witnesses, as pressure, as an audience. My chest became tight. Ethan? He continued. I've tried discussing this privately. The words hurt, as though I had become difficult, unreasonable. I think everyone here loves you, he said. Uncle David nodded. Of course. Ethan looked around the room. And everyone wants what's best. I finally understood. He wanted family agreement, family pressure, a group decision. He wanted me to become the unreasonable one. Melissa spoke softly. Juliana deserves comfort. I answered. I have comfort. Ethan shook his head. You have isolation. I have my home. You have memories. The room became silent, because somehow he had made memories sound like a disease. I looked toward Richard's photograph above the fireplace. For 43 years, that man had built this home, and now our son was reducing it to a problem. Emma finally spoke. Ethan, maybe this isn't the right time. He ignored her. His voice grew stronger. You spent your entire life making sacrifices for me. I nodded. Yes. And I became successful. Yes. I built a career. Yes. His eyes met mine. So why does it feel like I'm the one carrying everyone now? The sentence shocked the room. Uncle David looked uncomfortable. Melissa lowered her eyes. I felt my heart break. Because my son truly believed it. He believed he had become the burden bearer, the provider, the protector. And perhaps nobody had ever corrected him. I spoke quietly. No one is asking you to carry me. He laughed softly. Aren't they? What do you mean? He looked around the room. Mom, you've depended on me for years. The words struck me like cold water. I have never depended on you. You depend on my help. You visit 4 times a year. He ignored that. You depend on my advice. I didn't ask for it. His frustration grew. You depend on my success. The room became absolutely silent. Even the grandfather clock seemed louder. Tick, tick, tick. I stared at him. Ethan. His voice rose. Everything I've built took sacrifice. I know. I worked for everything I have. I know. Nobody gave me anything. My heart stopped. Nobody gave me anything. The sentence hung in the air. 40 years. 40 years of sacrifice. College tuition. 2 jobs. Refinancing our home. Richard's retirement. Everything. Gone. Erased. Nobody gave me anything. I saw Emma close her eyes. Uncle David looked away. And then Ethan said the words that would change everything. He looked directly at me. Mom, you owe me some understanding. I remained silent. You owe me trust. Still silent. Then, you owe me everything I've done for this family. The room stopped breathing. I could hear only the clock. My hands trembled. Richard's words suddenly returned. You'll know when the time comes. I looked toward the hallway, toward the staircase, toward the bedroom upstairs. The envelope, still waiting, still unopened. Melissa spoke carefully. Ethan, but he wasn't finished. I've carried this family for years. I slowly stood. My knees felt weak. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I looked at my son, the boy I had carried, the man Richard had protected, the child who once slept with the lights on because he feared thunderstorms. And standing before me now was a stranger who believed his success had erased everyone who helped him reach it. I spoke very quietly. No, Ethan. He looked confused. No, you are wrong. His face hardened. So now I'm the villain? No. Then what? I looked directly into his eyes. You forgot. The room remained silent. Everyone waited. My heart pounded because I finally understood. The unopened envelope upstairs was no longer a possibility. It was a necessity. Richard had known this moment would come, not because he stopped loving our son, but because he understood that pride can become louder than memory. I turned toward the staircase. Mom! I didn't answer. My feet moved slowly. One step, another. Behind me, nobody spoke. The entire family sat in silence. When I reached the top of the stairs, I stopped outside my bedroom. The closet door stood slightly open. Inside, on the upper shelf, sat the yellow envelope. The one Richard had placed in my hands 12 years earlier. The one I had spent months avoiding. The one waiting for the exact moment my son forgot who had carried him. Downstairs, I heard Ethan call my name, but I no longer answered. Because for the first time since Richard died, I finally understood why my husband had asked me to wait. And as I reached toward the envelope, my hands trembling, I realized that Christmas Day had become the day my son demanded everything. And perhaps the day he would finally learn how much had already been given to him. My fingers trembled as I lifted the envelope from the shelf. The paper felt fragile. 12 years. 12 years of waiting. Behind me, I could still hear faint voices downstairs. The family remained in the living room frozen by what Ethan had said. You owe me everything. The words echoed inside my head. I slowly returned downstairs. No one spoke. Even Melissa looked frightened now. I sat at the dining table and placed the envelope in front of me. Ethan stared at it. What is that? I looked at him. Something your father left for this day. His expression changed. What day? The day you forgot. The room became perfectly silent. I carefully broke the seal. Inside were several documents, letters, receipts, bank statements, a smaller sealed note. Richard's handwriting covered the first page. For Ethan, only if he forgets who carried him. My voice trembled as I began reading. My son, if your mother is reading this, then something has gone terribly wrong. I hope I am wrong. I hope this letter is never opened, but if it is, then I need you to remember certain things. Not because I want to shame you, because I want to save you. Ethan's face had become pale. Nobody moved. I continued, You have always been intelligent. You have always been ambitious, and I have always been proud of you. But pride is dangerous when it forgets gratitude. You may someday believe you built your life alone. You did not. I stopped. My throat tightened. Emma wiped her eyes. Uncle David lowered his head. Richard's words filled the room. Words from a man who had been dead for 12 years. And somehow he was still the strongest voice in the house. I continued reading. When your mother worked evenings at the bookstore, she came home with swollen feet. She stood behind a register for 4 years so you could attend college. She never complained. When I refinanced our house, it was to pay your tuition. We never told you, because we wanted you to walk proudly. Ethan swallowed. Melissa looked at him. She clearly had never heard any of this. I reached inside the envelope and removed several documents. College tuition statements, loan records, mortgage papers, bank withdrawals. Every sacrifice carefully organized. Richard had documented everything, not to collect a debt, to preserve the truth. I handed one document to Ethan. This is the refinancing agreement. His hands shook. I handed him another. This is my retirement withdrawal. His eyes moved across the page. $27,000. I heard Melissa whisper, "Oh my God." But Richard's letter continued. Success is not a ladder climbed alone. It is built by hands you may never notice. Your mother carried you. I carried you. And many others carried you too. If you ever believe someone owes you because you became successful, then you have already become poor. Nobody spoke. Not even Ethan. Then I reached the second packet inside the envelope, the one tied with a small string. I looked at it. My heart pounded because I suddenly remembered what George had told me. Richard helped Ethan once, years ago, quietly. I untied the string. Inside sat financial records, bank transfers, legal receipts, settlement documents. I looked up. Ethan. He stared at the papers. His face had gone completely white. What is that? I opened the final letter. This one was addressed to me, Juliana. If you are reading this part, Ethan has forgotten more than I feared. He has forgotten mercy. He has forgotten help. And he has forgotten the second chance he was given. Our son made a serious mistake at 26. He invested money he did not have. He signed agreements he did not understand. He nearly lost everything before his career had even begun. I sold part of my retirement. I paid the debts. I protected his law license. I protected his future. And I asked him for only one thing. Remember. The room became still, absolutely still. I looked at Ethan. His eyes were fixed on the table. Melissa stared at him. Emma looked shocked. Uncle David whispered, "My God." I continued, I never told your mother because I wanted you to have dignity. But if you ever claim nobody helped you, then you need the truth. You did not build your life alone. None of us do. Melissa finally spoke. Ethan. He didn't answer. She looked at him again. Is this true? He remained silent. The silence itself became the answer. Emma spoke softly. I remember something. Everyone looked at her. You disappeared for several months. Ethan said nothing. She continued. Uncle Richard told everyone you were traveling? Her eyes filled with tears. You weren't traveling. Still nothing. Melissa stared at her husband. You told me you built everything yourself. He finally spoke. I did. I looked at him. No son. His eyes met mine. Pain, shame, anger, fear. Everything lived there at once. You lied. I was young. Your father saved you. I paid him back. I shook my head. No. His voice rose. I worked for everything afterward. Richard's letter lay open between us, and suddenly I understood something. The problem wasn't that Ethan had failed. The problem was that he had erased everyone who helped him survive that failure. Melissa stood. You never told me. He looked at her. It was 20 years ago. You said your father only helped with tuition. He said nothing. I could see his entire world collapsing, not because of money, not because of debt, because the story he had told himself for years was breaking apart. The self-made man, the independent success, the person who owed nobody. All of it had been built on forgetting. I folded Richard's letter carefully. My husband had known, not because he predicted this exact evening, but because he understood human pride. He knew success sometimes rewrites memory, and memory must occasionally be restored. I looked directly at my son. For the first time all evening, my voice was completely steady. You said I owed you everything. His eyes filled with tears. I continued. Your father gave you his retirement. I gave you my savings. We gave you our youth. We gave you our dreams. We gave you our security. The room remained silent. Then I said the words Richard had written 12 years earlier. No one carried you forever, Ethan. He lowered his head. But someone carried you first. And for the first time that entire Christmas afternoon, my son finally had nothing left to say. No one moved. The fire continued burning softly in the living room, but the warmth had disappeared from the house. Ethan sat motionless. Richard's letters lay open on the dining table. The old financial documents were spread around him like pieces of a life he had spent years trying to forget. Melissa finally broke the silence. Why didn't you tell me? Ethan didn't answer. She spoke again. 20 years, Ethan. His voice came out quietly. It didn't matter anymore. It mattered to your father. He looked down. It was over. No, I said softly. It wasn't. Everyone looked at me, because the truth was sitting in front of us. Not the financial mistake, not the investment losses, not the money Richard had sacrificed. The truth was forgetting. Richard had not been afraid that Ethan would fail. He had been afraid that Ethan would erase the people who helped him survive. Uncle David leaned forward. Son, everybody falls down. Ethan remained silent. What matters is who helps you stand up. Emma wiped tears from her eyes. I never knew Uncle Richard paid those debts. He didn't want anyone to know, I said. Melissa looked at the paperwork again. How much was it? I answered quietly. Almost everything he had saved. The room fell silent again. Because Richard had never been a wealthy man, every dollar represented overtime, weekends, missed vacations, delayed retirement, sacrifices. Ethan finally spoke. He volunteered. I looked at him. What? He chose to help me. The words shocked me, not because they were entirely wrong. Richard had chosen to help. But something in Ethan's voice still sounded defensive, still sounded like justification. Melissa stared at him. He saved your career. I know. He protected your future. I know. Then why did you tell me nobody helped you? He looked at her. I built everything after that. That isn't the same thing. His face hardened. I worked for 20 years. I nodded. Yes. I built my firm. Yes. I earned everything afterward. Yes. His voice rose. So why am I being treated like a criminal? The question hung in the room, because that was how he saw it. He thought the problem was exposure, humiliation, judgment. But that wasn't the problem. I stood and walked slowly toward him. My voice remained calm. No one is punishing you. Then what is this? I touched Richard's letter. This is memory. He looked away. I sat beside him. For the first time all evening, I saw my son instead of the successful attorney. Not the confident man, not the accomplished lawyer. Just my little boy. Frightened, ashamed, cornered. And suddenly, I remembered something. When Ethan was 9 years old, he broke a neighbor's window playing baseball. He hid in his bedroom all afternoon. Richard finally sat beside him and said, "Mistakes don't destroy men. Hiding from them does." I think Richard had spent his entire life teaching that lesson, and Ethan had never fully learned it. Melissa stood near the window. Her voice trembled. Are we in trouble? Everyone looked at Ethan. For several seconds, he said nothing. Finally, yes. The room became very still. How much trouble? Uncle David asked. Ethan closed his eyes. The investment partnership collapsed. How much money? Almost all of it. Melissa looked stunned. How much? He swallowed. Nearly 700,000. Nobody spoke. I could hear the clock again. Tick, tick, tick. Melissa looked pale. You told me it would recover. I thought it would. You said we still had savings. We do. How much? He looked down. Not enough. Her voice cracked. And you wanted your mother to sell her house. He didn't answer. Because now everyone understood. The retirement communities, the documents, the pressure, the urgency. It had never been about my safety. It had been about fear. Fear of losing everything. Fear of failure. Fear of becoming 26 years old again. The young man Richard once rescued. Melissa sat down. Tears rolled down her face. You lied to me. I was trying to fix it. By using your mother. No. But even he no longer sounded certain. I walked back to the table. There was still one page left. One final paragraph in Richard's letter. I had not read it aloud. Until now. My hands trembled. I looked at Ethan. This is the last part. He slowly raised his eyes. I began reading. If you are hearing these words, then you are probably hurting. Perhaps you are afraid. Perhaps you have failed. Perhaps you believe losing money means losing your worth. It does not. But if you ever ask your mother to pay for your pride, then you will lose something far more valuable than money. You will lose yourself. If that day comes, apologize. Not because you are weak, because you are my son. And I know the good man inside you still exists. The room became silent once more. Even Ethan was crying now. Real tears. Not anger. Not frustration. Grief. Because Richard had somehow reached across 12 years and spoken directly to him. Melissa quietly covered her face. Emma sobbed. Uncle David stared into the fire. I folded the letter. And suddenly, I felt exhausted. Not angry, not victorious, just tired. Very tired. Ethan finally spoke, his voice barely audible. I didn't want this. What did you want? I asked. He looked at the documents. The investors are suing. Melissa looked up sharply. What? I didn't tell you. Her face collapsed. Why? Because I thought I could fix it. By taking your mother's house. His eyes filled again. I wasn't taking it. Then what were you doing? He couldn't answer, because perhaps he genuinely didn't know anymore. Sometimes people move towards something wrong one small step at a time, one justification, one fear, one secret, until eventually they wake up somewhere they never intended to go. I walked to the kitchen. Nobody followed. I stood at the sink, looking outside. Snow continued falling. Christmas lights glowed across the street. Richard had always loved snow. A few minutes later, footsteps approached. Ethan. He stood behind me. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, I failed him. I looked at him. No. His eyes were red. I forgot him. The words broke my heart, because they were true. He had forgotten. Forgotten the overtime, the refinancing, the retirement savings, the quiet sacrifices, the father who carried him. I touched his hand. You can still remember. He began crying again, not loudly, just quietly, like the little boy who once feared thunderstorms. And for the first time in many years, I saw not the lawyer, not the investor, not the successful man. I saw my son, broken, ashamed, and standing in the ruins of the story he had told himself. Behind us, Richard's letter remained on the table, waiting, as though even after death, he still believed his son could find his way home. The house became very quiet after everyone left. Uncle David and Aunt Susan departed first. Emma hugged me tightly before walking to her car. Melissa barely spoke. She thanked me for dinner, gathered her coat, and sat inside the SUV without looking at Ethan. Only my son remained. He stood alone in the living room beside the Christmas tree. The colored lights reflected against the windows. For a moment, he looked very old. Older than 40. Older than his years. I began collecting the dishes. Ethan finally spoke. Mom. I didn't answer immediately, not because I wanted to punish him, because I was tired, truly tired. 40 years of motherhood suddenly felt heavy. I never wanted to hurt you. I placed another plate into the sink. But you did. He lowered his eyes. I know. No. He looked up. You don't. My voice surprised even me, because for the first time in many years, I was not speaking as a mother. I was speaking as a woman, as Juliana, as someone who had spent decades placing everyone else first. You wanted my house. It wasn't like that. You wanted control. I wanted to protect you. I turned toward him. From what? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out, because there was no answer. The truth had already been exposed. Not by me, not by George, not by Helen, by Richard. A dead man had spoken more honestly than anyone still living. Ethan sat down heavily in one of the dining chairs. His hands covered his face. I don't know what happened to me. The sentence hurt me because I had been asking myself the same question. When had the little boy disappear? When had gratitude become entitlement? When had success become ownership? I sat across from him. Do you remember when you were 16? He looked up. What? You wrecked your father's truck. He blinked. I barely touched it. You destroyed the front bumper. For the first time all evening, a tiny smile appeared. Dad was furious. No. Ethan frowned. He wasn't. He was scared. I remembered Richard standing in the garage that night. He had looked at our son and said, "The truck matters less than the person driving it." I looked at Ethan. Your father always cared more about you than your mistakes. His eyes filled again. I disappointed him. No, I forgot him. I nodded slowly. Yes. The word hurt, but it was necessary. Because forgiveness without truth is only avoidance. Ethan looked toward Richard's photograph above the fireplace. He believed in me. He still did when he wrote those letters. He expected this. No. I shook my head. He feared it. There is a difference. Richard had not predicted his son's failure. He had feared his son's pride. And pride can quietly become a wall between people who love each other. Several minutes passed. The fire burned lower. Snow continued falling outside. Finally, Ethan spoke again. The investors want settlements. How much? I don't know. You said there are lawsuits. Possibly. How bad is it? He stared at the floor. I may lose everything. Everything. The same word he had used against me. My house, my savings, my future. Now he feared losing his own. Part of me wanted to comfort him immediately. The mother inside me wanted to say, we'll figure it out. We'll help. You're not alone. But another voice had finally awakened. A quieter voice. Juliana's voice. The woman Richard had written about. The woman who always chose love before protection. And perhaps for the first time, I needed to choose both. Ethan. He looked at me. You cannot solve your fear with my life. His eyes widened. I wasn't. Yes. He stopped speaking because he knew. Deep down, he knew. Maybe he had never intended to steal anything. Maybe he had convinced himself it was temporary. Maybe he believed the house was simply an asset. But somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing me, stopped seeing his mother, stopped seeing the woman who still lived inside these walls. He had only seen value, money, safety, solutions. And that realization hurt more than the financial documents, more than the legal papers, more than the lies. A few minutes later, the front door opened. Melissa entered. Apparently, she had not left. She stood quietly. Ethan? He looked up. "We need to go." He nodded, but neither moved. Finally, she spoke again. "Did you really think your mother owed you?" The question hung in the room. Ethan stared at the floor. "I don't know." Melissa's voice trembled. "I need the truth." He looked at her. "I felt like I carried everything." She sat beside him. "We both did." He nodded. "I was scared." "I know. I didn't want to fail." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Then why didn't you tell me?" He had no answer. Because fear often isolates people, especially proud people, especially successful people. The people who believe they must always appear strong. I stood and walked toward the Christmas tree. Richard had placed the star on top every year, even during his illness, even when climbing the ladder hurt. I touched one of the ornaments. Ethan made it in second grade, a small wooden angel. The paint had faded, but I still kept it, because mothers keep everything. The drawings, the report cards, the broken ornaments, the memories, sometimes even the pain. I turned back toward my son. "Ethan." He looked up. "I need you to hear something." He waited. "A mother's love is not ownership." The room became silent. "I do not own you." He nodded slowly. "And you do not own me." His tears returned, because for the first time in his life, perhaps, he understood that love and entitlement cannot exist together. Parents give, children grow. But nobody becomes the owner of another person's sacrifices. Nobody inherits another person's life. Melissa quietly reached for his hand. He held it. Neither spoke. Eventually, he stood. He walked toward Richard's photograph. For several seconds, he simply stared. Then he whispered, "I'm sorry." I don't know whether he was speaking to his father, to himself, or to the little boy he once had been. Perhaps all three. Before leaving, he stopped at the front door. "Mom." "Yes." He looked exhausted, broken, ashamed. "I don't know how to fix this." I answered honestly, "Neither do I." And that was the truth, because healing rarely begins with solutions. It begins with honesty. The door closed behind them. The house became quiet once again. I sat alone beside the Christmas tree. Richard's letters remained on the table. The envelope lay open. The secrets were gone. Only truth remained. And for the first time in many years, I realized something important. Protecting myself did not mean loving my son less. It meant finally loving myself enough to stand beside him instead of underneath him. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, the old grandfather clock ticked steadily. And somewhere in the silence, I could almost hear Richard's voice. Not angry, not disappointed, simply waiting for both of us to remember who we truly were. The week after Christmas felt strangely empty. For the first time in years, Ethan did not call. Melissa did not text. No one spoke about retirement homes. No one mentioned selling the house. No legal documents arrived. The silence should have brought relief. Instead, it brought sadness. Because conflict at least meant people were still reaching for one another. Silence felt like grief. I spent the days taking down Christmas decorations. Richard had always waited until New Year's Day, but this year, I couldn't bear looking at the lights. The house suddenly felt larger. Too large. Not because I was alone, because something had ended. Helen came by nearly every afternoon. She never pushed, never offered advice unless I asked. One afternoon, while we packed ornaments into old boxes, she finally said, "What do you want now?" I looked at her. "What do you mean?" "Not what Ethan wants." She placed another ornament into a box. "Not what Richard wanted." She looked directly at me. "What does Juliana want?" The question surprised me, because I honestly didn't know. For 40 years, I had been someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's caregiver, someone's support. Perhaps I had forgotten myself too. That evening, I walked through the house slowly. Richard's workshop, the attic, the guest room, Ethan's old bedroom. The baseball trophies still sat on the shelf. His high school diploma remained framed. A faded photograph showed Richard teaching him to drive. I sat on the bed, and suddenly I began crying. Not because of the argument, not because of the house, because I finally understood how frightened Ethan truly was. Fear had simply arrived wearing expensive suits and legal documents. Fear had spoken in financial language. Fear had called itself practicality. But underneath everything stood my son, terrified of failure, terrified of becoming the young man Richard once rescued. 3 days later, George called. "How are you?" "I'm not sure." He laughed softly. "That's an honest answer." We spoke for nearly an hour. About Richard, about aging, about families. Finally, he asked, "What will you do?" "I don't know." "Will you help Ethan?" The question sat heavily between us, because every mother eventually faces it. How do you help an adult child without losing yourself? I answered honestly, "I don't know how." George remained quiet. Then he said, "Richard once told me something." "What?" "He said Juliana would give away her last dollar if someone she loved needed it." I smiled sadly. "That sounds like me." He worried about that. "Why?" "Because love without boundaries becomes sacrifice without end." The words stayed with me. That evening, I opened Richard's final letter again. I read every line, every sacrifice, every warning, every expression of love. One sentence caught my attention. "Protecting yourself is not betraying your son." For 12 years, those words had waited. Perhaps they were meant for this exact moment. The following Saturday, my phone rang. "Ethan." I stared at the screen. For several seconds, I couldn't move. Finally, I answered. "Hello." His voice sounded different, smaller. "Mom." "How are you?" A long silence. "Can I come over?" "When?" "Today." I looked outside. Snow covered the neighborhood. The same porch, the same driveway, the same home he wanted me to leave. "All right." He arrived alone. No Melissa, no briefcase, no laptop, no legal documents. He wore jeans and an old winter coat, the same brown coat Richard had bought him years earlier. For several moments, we simply stood at the door. Then he hugged me, really hugged me. The kind of hug he had not given me in years. I felt him trembling. We sat in the kitchen. I made coffee. Neither of us knew where to begin. Finally, he spoke. "Melissa moved to her sister's house." My heart sank. "For how long?" "I don't know." "What happened?" He stared into his cup. "She said she doesn't know who I am." The words hurt. because perhaps Ethan didn't know either. He continued, "The lawsuits are real." "How serious?" "I may lose my partnership." I remained quiet. "The firm found out. What happens now?" He laughed softly. "I honestly don't know." For the first time in years, he sounded like the boy who used to ask Richard for help with homework. No answers, no confidence, no certainty, just fear. He looked around the kitchen. "I haven't sat here in years." "No. I forgot how small this room is." I smiled. "It always seemed large when you were young." He nodded. "I remember Dad fixing the sink. He hated plumbing." A tiny smile appeared. "He was terrible at it." We both laughed. The first genuine laughter in months. Then his eyes filled with tears. "I miss him." "I know." "No." He shook his head. "I really miss him." He looked toward the living room. "I need him." And there it was, the truth beneath everything. Not money, not lawsuits, not investments. A son who had lost his father. A man who had spent years pretending he no longer needed anyone, until life finally proved otherwise. He removed something from his coat pocket, a folded piece of paper. "I wrote something." I looked at him. "What is it?" "A letter." "To who?" He swallowed. "Dad." My heart tightened. He unfolded the paper. His hands shook. And then he began reading. "Dad, I forgot. I forgot what you gave me. I forgot what Mom gave me. I forgot who stood behind me. I told myself I built everything. Maybe I needed to believe that because I was afraid. Afraid that if people knew how much help I needed, they would think less of me. But you never thought less of me. You saved me twice. And I repaid you by forgetting." His voice broke. He could not continue. Tears rolled down his face. I had not seen my son cry since Richard's funeral. He covered his eyes. "I'm sorry." I moved beside him. Not as the woman being asked to save him. Not as the owner of a house. Not as someone who owed him anything. Simply as his mother. I held his hand, and for the first time since Christmas, he finally allowed himself to become vulnerable. "I don't know how to fix my life." I answered honestly. "Neither did your father." He looked up. "What?" "He was afraid many times." "Dad." "Yes." I smiled softly. He just didn't let fear make his decisions. The room became quiet. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, something else had begun. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Not solutions. Not reconciliation. Something smaller. Something more fragile. Humility. And perhaps that was exactly where Richard hoped his son would someday return. Because a man who remembers who carried him no longer needs to pretend he walked alone. January arrived with bitter cold. The Christmas decorations had been packed away. The neighborhood lights disappeared one by one, and winter settled heavily over our town. But inside me, something had changed. For the first time in many years, I no longer woke up afraid. Not because the problems had disappeared, because the truth had finally arrived. Ethan called every few days. The conversations were different now. Slower, careful. There were long pauses. Sometimes neither of us knew what to say. But for the first time in months, he stopped asking about my house. He stopped discussing retirement communities. He stopped mentioning my future. Instead, he asked, How are you sleeping? Did Helen visit? Are you eating enough? Small questions, ordinary questions, the kind a son asks his mother. One snowy afternoon he came over again. This time he carried no paperwork, no briefcase, only a cardboard box. "What's this?" I asked. He placed it on the kitchen table. "My office." I looked inside. Framed awards, certificates, photographs, a crystal plaque. His partnership recognition. The award his firm had given him 5 years earlier. I looked at him. "What happened?" He sat down. "I resigned." The words shocked me. "You resigned?" He nodded. "The firm wanted me to stay." "Then why?" He looked toward the window. "Because I don't know who I became there." I remained silent. "The lawsuits are being negotiated." "What about the investment losses? I'll spend years paying them." His voice remained calm. No anger, no blame, no excuses, just truth. "What about your career?" He smiled sadly. "I still know the law." "And Melissa?" He looked down. "She's thinking." The answer hurt me, because marriages can survive financial loss. They often struggle to survive dishonesty. "I hope she comes home." "So do I." Several minutes passed. Then Ethan reached into his coat pocket. "I brought something else." He handed me a document. I adjusted my glasses. It was the power of attorney. The same documents he had asked me to sign. Every page had been shredded, the signatures removed, the legal authority destroyed. He looked at me. "I'm sorry." I carefully folded the pieces. "I know." "No." His eyes filled. "I really am." He took a long breath. "I wasn't trying to steal your house." "I know. I think I convinced myself I was protecting you." I nodded. And maybe I was protecting myself. There it was. Finally, the truth. Fear had disguised itself as concern. Pride had disguised itself as responsibility. And now, both masks had fallen away. A week later, Melissa called. Her voice sounded tired. "Juliana?" "Hello, dear." "I wanted to see you." She came that afternoon. For nearly 2 hours, we sat together in the living room. She cried, not dramatically, quietly, the tears of someone grieving a marriage that still existed. "I don't know who he became." I thought carefully before answering. "I think he forgot who he was." She looked at me. "Can people come back?" I looked at Richard's photograph. "Your father-in-law believed they could." She smiled sadly. "He saved Ethan twice." "Yes." And now, I thought about the letters, the envelopes, the sacrifices, the truth. "No," I said softly. "This time, Ethan must save himself." Several days later, Ethan invited me to lunch. The same small diner Richard loved. The same booth, the same waitress, the same pie. As we sat together, Ethan suddenly laughed. "What?" He shook his head. "Dad used to order the same thing every time. Meatloaf." He smiled, and he complained about the coffee every single visit. He hated weak coffee. For the first time in many years, we talked about Richard without sadness. Only memories. Only love. Eventually, Ethan became quiet. "Mom." "Yes?" "I sold my car." "The Mercedes?" He nodded. "And the vacation property?" I looked surprised. "The cabin?" "Yes." "Why?" He smiled weakly. "Because I finally realized something. What? I don't need to look successful. The sentence almost sounded like Richard. Perhaps that was the point. As winter slowly passed, changes continued. Melissa returned home. The lawsuits moved toward settlements. Ethan accepted a smaller position with another law firm. The salary was lower, the title less impressive, but something inside him seemed lighter. One afternoon he visited with several boxes. "What's all this?" He smiled. "Dad's garage." Inside were old tools, fishing equipment, woodworking supplies, the things Richard had left behind. "I want to learn." "Learn what?" He picked up one of Richard's old hammers. "How to build something." The statement brought tears to my eyes because Richard built things: tables, shelves, birdhouses, relationships, trust. And perhaps his son finally understood that building takes longer than earning. That evening, we stood together inside the garage. Dust covered everything. Richard's workbench remained untouched. Ethan carefully ran his fingers across the wood. "I remember standing here." "He taught you how to use a saw." "I forgot." "No." I smiled softly. "You remembered." He looked around the room. Dad knew. He feared. He knew me better than anyone. Ethan nodded. "I wish I could apologize." I looked toward the old workbench. "You just did." The final weeks of winter passed quietly, peacefully. Not because everything had been repaired, because everyone had finally stopped pretending. One Sunday afternoon, George visited. We sat in the living room drinking coffee. Ethan joined us. For a long time, nobody mentioned the letters. Finally, George spoke. "Your father once told me something." Ethan looked up. "What?" "He said, life eventually asks every man one question." "What question?" George smiled. "Who helped you become who you are?" The room became quiet. Ethan looked at Richard's photograph. Then he answered softly, "My father." He looked at me. "My mother." And then, for the first time since Christmas, I saw peace in his eyes. Not because his problems had disappeared, because gratitude had returned. Outside, the snow had begun melting. The trees remained bare. But spring was coming. And perhaps families are not very different. Sometimes they survive winter. Sometimes they lose leaves. Sometimes they stand in silence. But if the roots remain alive, new growth eventually finds its way back. And for the first time in many years, I believed ours might too. Spring arrived quietly. The snow disappeared. The grass slowly returned. Small green leaves appeared on the old maple tree outside my kitchen window. For the first time in a very long while, the house felt alive again. Not because everything had been repaired, because nothing was pretending anymore. Ethan continued rebuilding his life. The lawsuits had not disappeared. The financial losses remained. His new position paid less than his old one. Some friends stopped calling. Several professional relationships ended. The success he had spent 20 years building had changed almost overnight. But strangely, he seemed calmer, lighter, more honest. Sometimes losing the wrong things allows us to find the right ones. One Saturday morning, I found him sitting on the front porch. The same porch where Richard and I had spent thousands of mornings drinking coffee. He was holding one of his father's old mugs. The handle had been cracked for years. Richard refused to throw it away. I sat beside him. Neither of us spoke. The birds sang. A light breeze moved through the trees. Finally, Ethan smiled. Dad loved this porch. He did. I never understood why. I looked across the yard. Because nothing important happened here. He looked confused. What do you mean? Your father spent his whole life working. I smiled softly. This was the only place he allowed himself to stop. Ethan stared at the street. I don't know how he did it. Did what? Carry everything. I looked at him carefully. He didn't. What? He let people help him. He became quiet, because perhaps that had always been his greatest struggle. Success had taught him independence. Life was now teaching him humility. A few weeks later, Ethan asked if we could visit Richard's grave together. It was the first time he had gone there since the funeral. The cemetery looked completely different in spring. Green grass, warm sunlight, birdsong, life. We stood beside the headstone in silence. Ethan placed fresh flowers beside it. For several minutes, he said nothing. Then he spoke. I'm sorry, Dad. His voice shook. I forgot. Tears filled his eyes. I forgot everything. The wind moved through the trees. I stood beside my son. Not to rescue him, not to carry him, simply to stand with him. He continued speaking. I wanted everyone to believe I built my life. He wiped his eyes. But you built me. His shoulders trembled. Both of you did. And perhaps that was the apology Richard had waited for. Not guilt, not punishment, memory. When we returned home, Ethan surprised me. He carried several folders. What are these? He smiled. I want your help. My help. I've been talking to George. I looked surprised. About what? He placed the documents on the kitchen table. There were plans, financial papers, property information. One proposal immediately caught my attention. The Freeman House Community Fund. I looked up. What is this? He smiled. Dad spent his whole life helping people quietly. I felt tears rising. I know. I think you do the same. He pointed to the papers. We could create something here. Here. In this house. The idea shocked me. He continued. Small support groups. Community dinners. Widows. Older women living alone. People who need help. I looked around the kitchen, Richard's kitchen, my kitchen, our home. For the first time, I saw something new. Not the end of our family story, the continuation of it. Several months later, the first gathering took place. 6 women attended. Helen helped organize everything. George brought coffee. Melissa came too. She and Ethan had begun counseling. Their marriage remained fragile, but honesty had returned. And sometimes honesty is the first form of healing. One woman had recently lost her husband. Another was facing financial problems. A third had been pressured by her children to sell her home. As I listened, I realized something. I was not alone. Many women spend their entire lives giving, and eventually they forget they also deserve safety, respect, boundaries, a voice. After the meeting ended, Ethan remained behind. The sun was setting. The house was quiet. Very much like the evening when he had first said, "You owe me everything." He stood beside the dining table, the same room, the same walls, but 2 completely different people. He looked at me.
Mom?
Yes. I need to tell you something. I waited. He took a deep breath.
You don't owe me anything.
Tears immediately filled my eyes, because perhaps those were the words I had needed all along. He continued.
You already gave me everything.
For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I said something I had spent months learning myself. I forgive you. His eyes filled.
But forgiveness isn't forgetting.
He nodded.
I know.
And it doesn't mean I stop protecting myself.
I understand.
I smiled gently. For the first time, he truly did. We sat together on the porch that evening. The old grandfather clock inside the house continued ticking. Richard's chair remained beside mine. The sunset painted the sky orange and gold, and I suddenly realized something. The envelope had never been about exposing my son. It had never been about humiliation. It had never been about proving who sacrificed more. It was about remembrance. Because families are not destroyed by mistakes. They are destroyed by forgetting. Forgetting sacrifice. Forgetting gratitude. Forgetting love. My son once believed success meant standing alone. Now he understood that none of us arrive anywhere alone. And as the evening grew darker, Ethan quietly asked, "Do you think Dad would be proud?" I looked toward the sky, then toward the old house, then at the man sitting beside me. Not the lawyer, not the investor, not the frightened boy, simply my son. And I smiled. I think he already is.